Mark Jensen woke abruptly to the acrid sting of smoke in his nostrils. His heart slammed in his chest as a faint orange glow filtered through the curtains of his bedroom window. For a moment, disbelief froze him in place, but then the sharp crackling of flames shattered the silence. The garage, his sanctuary of tools, memories, and projects, was on fire. He bolted out of bed, grabbing his phone from the nightstand. Smoke thickened quickly, filling the room with a choking haze. Outside, the flickering light danced wildly against the walls of the neighboring houses. Mark's neighbors were stirring, their faces pressed against windows, eyes wide with alarm. Mark raced downstairs and burst out the front door, the cold night air biting at his skin. The fire roared, licking hungrily at the wooden frame of the garage. His prized motorcycle stood perilously close to the flames, the leather cover melting away. His heart sank deeper as the fire department screamed down the street with flashing lights. Mark tried to piece together what had happened. The garage door was locked tight. No forced entry signs, no electrical faults, no explanation. Only the sickening suspicion that this wasn't an accident. Mark's mind flickered to the HOA, the homeowners association, that controlled the neighborhood with an iron fist. The past months had been tense. The HOA had rejected his requests to fix a minor fence issue and threatened fines for non-compliance. He remembered the cold stares during the last community meeting, the subtle but unmistakable messages from the HOA board president, Lisa Harlow. He shook the thought away. Could they really be involved? It seemed impossible. But deep inside, a gnawing suspicion had taken root, growing darker with every passing minute. As firefighters battled the blaze, Mark noticed a figure slipping away into the shadows behind the row of hedges. His gut tightened. He called out, but the figure vanished before he could get a clear look. Later, sitting on the curb with a blanket draped over his shoulders, Mark listened as the fire chief muttered the same tired lines about accidental causes and electrical faults. But the fire chief's eyes darted nervously as Mark asked questions. Something wasn't right. The HOA president, Lisa, arrived shortly after, her face carefully neutral. "We're sorry this happened, Mark, but please understand, the HOA has protocols, and we have to be fair to everyone." Her tone was icy but measured. Mark's jaw tightened. "Fair? You threatened me with fines for offense, but now my garage burns? You expect me to believe this is just a coincidence?" Lisa's smile was thin and brittle. "Let's not jump to conclusions. There's an investigation underway." But Mark knew better. This was no accident, and the worst part? The HOA was about to use this incident to squeeze him out, labeling him irresponsible and dangerous. As neighbors whispered behind their curtains, Mark made a silent vow. He wouldn't let this go. He would uncover the truth, no matter how deep the darkness ran in his quiet suburban world. That night, as the embers cooled and the neighborhood slipped back into uneasy silence, Mark's mind raced. The fire was just the beginning. Something far bigger was at stake, and Mark Jensen was ready to fight. The morning after the fire, Mark felt the weight of the neighborhood's silent judgment pressing down on him. His garage was reduced to a smoldering skeleton, a charred ruin where his memories and hard work had burned to ash. Yet what gnawed at him more than the loss was the eerie calm, the absence of support, the suspicious glances from neighbors, and the unnerving silence from the HOA determined. To find answers, Mark started by visiting the local fire department's investigation unit. The officer in charge, Lieutenant Ramirez, was polite but cautious. "The fire looks suspicious," Ramirez admitted in a low voice, "but without clear evidence, it's hard to label it arson." Mark nodded, sensing the unspoken pressures. The HOA had connections, powerful ones, and the last thing anyone wanted was a scandal. "Did you find anything unusual?" he pressed. Ramirez hesitated, then slid. a small stack of documents across the table. The fire inspection records for your property were incomplete. In fact, the garage hadn't been inspected in over 2 years, which is odd given HOA policies. Mark frowned. The HOA was responsible for scheduling those inspections. Why would they let it slip? Or worse, why cover it up? His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. Mark's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about insurance or fines anymore. Someone was warning him off, but he wasn't about to back down. Returning home, Mark noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the windows tinted too, dark to see inside. Every time he stepped outside, the car was there, always watching. His neighbors averted their eyes when he approached, too scared to speak or perhaps complicit. That evening at the monthly HOA meeting, Mark faced the board. Members, Lisa Harlow at the helm, her calm demeanor cracking under his relentless questioning. Why were the fire inspections ignored? Why hasn't the HOA taken responsibility for this disaster? Lisa's smile was tight, forced. Mr. Jensen, our records show that your garage was in compliance. Any missing inspections are clerical errors. We're handling the matter appropriately. Mark noticed a flicker of discomfort from one of the board members, a man named Greg Dalton, whose gaze dropped to his notes. Something was off. As the meeting ended, Lisa approached Mark quietly. You should reconsider your actions. This neighborhood works on trust and keeping certain things quiet. Mark's blood boiled. Threats cloaked as advice only fueled his determination. He wasn't going anywhere. That night, unable to sleep, Mark scoured HOA documents online. That's when he found it, a cryptic clause buried deep in the HOAs. Bylaws about discretionary property management rights, vague enough to mask questionable control over residents' property. A clause no one ever mentioned at meetings. His phone vibrated again. Another anonymous text. You don't know what you're getting into. Mark clenched his fists. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute. It was a calculated power play. The fire, the silence, the veiled threats. All signs of a dark undercurrent lurking beneath the manicured lawns. Determined to protect his home and uncover the truth, Mark reached out to a local real estate attorney, Sarah Kim, known for taking on tough cases against HOAs. Sarah listened intently as Mark recounted the fire, the HOA's suspicious behavior, and the anonymous threats. This isn't just about fire damage, Sarah said gravely. You're dealing with a group that's hiding something bigger. We need to dig deeper but tread carefully. These people have influence. As Mark left the meeting, the black sedan was gone. For now. But the shadows had only just begun to close in. Mark sat in the cramped office of Sarah Kim, the attorney he had hired to take on the HOA. The walls were lined with law books and framed degrees, but today, the weight of the battle ahead made the room feel smaller, colder. Sarah had been poring over the HOA's bylaws, contracts, and financial statements for days. She looked up from her laptop, eyes grim. Mark, this HOA isn't just your average neighborhood association. They're operating like a shadow corporation with near absolute control over the residents. Mark's jaw tightened. I want to sue. I want compensation for my garage. And I want to expose them. Sarah shook her head slowly. It won't be that simple. Look here. She pointed to a dense paragraph buried deep in the contract Mark had signed when he bought his house. This clause basically strips homeowners of many rights to contest HOA decisions or liabilities. It forces disputes into arbitration, heavily favoring the HOA. Mark's stomach dropped. So they've rigged the system? Exactly. And it gets worse. Sarah pulled up another document, the HOA's financials. They're extremely secretive. Most of their income comes from fines and fees imposed on residents, and they use the threat of eviction to keep people in line. Mark's mind flashed back to Lisa's icy smile, to the veiled threats at the meeting, and the anonymous texts. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "There's been an anonymous tip about a secret meeting of the HOA board this week. They're probably discussing how to handle you." Mark's eyes narrowed. "I need to know everything they're planning." Over the next few days, Mark and Sarah worked tirelessly to gather evidence. Mark spoke quietly with a few neighbors, but most were too afraid to talk. Some hinted at stories of homeowners mysteriously forced out, properties quietly transferred, and an unspoken code of silence. Mark's frustration grew. Every legal avenue seemed blocked. Every piece of evidence seemed to vanish into thin air, but he refused to back down. Then one night, as he was reviewing documents in his home office, the power flickered and went out. The darkness swallowed the room. His phone buzzed in the silence. Another anonymous message. "Stop before it's too late." Mark's hands trembled, but he typed back, "I'm not afraid." Suddenly there was a sharp knock at the door. He peered through the peephole. No one. But on the doorstep lay a small unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photo, a picture of Mark taken outside his house during the night. Someone was watching him. His pulse quickened. This was no longer just a legal fight. It was personal and dangerous. The next day, Sarah warned him to be cautious. "They're trying to intimidate you. But you have leverage too. We just need to find it." Mark nodded. He realized he was playing a high-stakes game against invisible enemies who would do anything to keep their grip on the neighborhood. As he stared at the burned remains of his garage through his kitchen window, Mark made a decision. If the law was rigged, if the system was stacked against him, he would find another way. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Mark had always considered his neighborhood a quiet sanctuary, but now it felt like a chessboard, with invisible players moving pieces in the dark. He knew he couldn't win this fight by conventional means. The HOA's legal fortress was too strong, their influence too deep, so he decided to strike where they least expected, their own land. During late nights with Sarah, the attorney, Mark pored over property records and HOA financial statements, hunting for a crack in their armor. It was there, a loophole buried in forgotten debts, unpaid taxes, and neglected parcels the HOA owned outside of its immediate neighborhood boundaries. "Look at this," Sarah said one evening, her finger tracing a document. "The HOA has dozens of parcels they never properly paid taxes on. If we move fast, we could buy them out before anyone else notices." Mark's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and dread. This was risky. It meant diving deep into the very system the HOA controlled, but it was also a chance to wrest control back, not just for himself, but for everyone suffocating under the HOA's shadow. He began quietly purchasing land through backdoor auctions, disguising his identity with shell companies and trusted intermediaries. The process was painstaking and slow, but every parcel he secured felt like a victory, a crack in the HOA's iron grip. Meanwhile, the HOA board grew frantic. Mark noticed changes immediately. The once cordial neighbors now avoided him completely, whispers followed his every move, and ominous messages escalated. One night, as Mark pulled into his driveway, the headlights of the black sedan blazed behind him. The car tailed him for blocks, weaving through side streets as if daring him to lose them. Mark's heart pounded, but he stayed calm, pulling into a gas station and waiting. The sedan stopped nearby. A shadowy figure stepped out, a man Mark recognized from the HOA meetings, Greg Dalton. He approached with a slow, deliberate smile. "You're stirring up trouble, Jensen," Greg said, voice low and threatening. "This neighborhood isn't big enough for both of us." Mark met his gaze steadily. "I'm not leaving until the truth comes out." Greg's smile vanished. "Be careful what you wish for." That night, Mark found his mailbox vandalized, a warning clearly meant to intimidate him. But instead of backing down, the incident steeled his resolve. Back at Sarah's office, they devised their next move. "If we can secure enough of the HOA's land," Sarah explained, "we can force them out legally. They won't have the property to control anymore." The plan was bold, nearly reckless, but it was the only path forward. As Mark worked behind the scenes, word spread quietly among a few brave neighbors. Some approached him with hushed thanks. Others warned him of the consequences. The community's facade of peace cracked, revealing a simmering undercurrent of fear and resentment. One evening, Mark received an unexpected visitor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carmichael, a longtime resident with a reputation for speaking her mind. "They burned your garage because you threatened their power," she whispered. "I've seen it before. But you're not alone anymore. The HOA's days are numbered." Her words carried hope, but also a reminder of the danger still lurking. As Mark stood on his porch, staring at the darkened streets, he realized the battle was no longer just about a fire or a garage. It was a fight for control, for justice, and for the soul of the community. And Mark Jensen was ready to claim his victory, no matter the cost. Mark's quiet land purchases were starting to unsettle the HOA board more than he expected. The tension in the neighborhood thickened, like a storm cloud ready to burst. He noticed that the usual polite nods from neighbors had turned into furtive glances and whispered conversations behind closed doors. Most people avoided him altogether, but some looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. One evening, Mark received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hesitant but curious, he answered. "Mark," a voice whispered urgently, "it's Jenna from the HOA board. I want to help you." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Jenna was one of the newer board members, someone who'd always seemed distant and strictly by the book. "Why would you want to help me?" he asked cautiously. "Because I'm tired of their games," Jenna said, her voice cracking slightly. "There's corruption you don't see, illegal deals, intimidation, even threats against residents who speak out. I can get you proof." Mark's mind raced. Could he trust her? Was this an opportunity or a trap? "Meet me at the park tomorrow, at dusk," Jenna instructed before hanging up. The next day, Mark arrived at the park under the fading light. Jenna was already there, looking around nervously before handing him a small USB drive. "This has emails, financial reports, secret meeting minutes, everything the board tries to hide," she whispered. Mark's eyes widened. This was the evidence he needed, but the risk was immense. If Jenna was caught, her position, maybe, even her safety, could be in jeopardy. As they parted ways, Mark felt a surge of hope. With Jenna's help, he might finally dismantle the HOA's iron grip. But the victory would not come easily. That night, as Mark plugged the USB into his laptop, strange noises outside his window jolted him. Shadows moved across the yard, too quick, too deliberate. A rock smashed his front porch light, plunging the house into darkness. Mark grabbed a flashlight and peered outside, heart pounding. No one was there, but the message was clear. Intimidation was escalating. He called Sarah immediately. "They're trying to scare me, but I have proof now. We can fight back." Sarah's voice was steady. "Good, but be careful. You're poking a hornet's nest." The next few days were a whirlwind. Using the data Jenna provided, Sarah uncovered a web of illicit transactions, board members funneling HOA funds into personal accounts, threatening residents into silence, and rigging votes to maintain their power. Mark shared the findings cautiously with a few trusted neighbors. Some joined his cause. Others warned him about crossing lines no one dared to cross. Then, betrayal struck. One evening, Mark received an anonymous tip. Jenna had disappeared. Her house was empty, and no one had seen her for days. The message was chilling. No one who defied the HOA went unpunished. Mark's resolve hardened. He would honor Jenna's courage by exposing the corruption fully and ending the HOA's reign. But as he prepared to go public, a shocking realization hit him. Some of the neighbors he thought were allies were feeding information back to the HOA. Trust was a fragile currency in this war. Alone but unbroken, Mark braced himself. The fight was no longer just about property or pride. It was a battle for survival in a neighborhood-turned battleground, and the stakes had never been higher. Mark's world had become a minefield. Every step forward felt like walking on thin ice. Jenna's disappearance had sent a clear message. The HOA would stop at nothing to maintain control. Yet Mark's determination burned brighter than ever. Sarah advised caution. "We need a plan that doesn't just expose them. It crushes their control permanently." That meant going beyond legal battles. It meant seizing power. Mark decided to make a bold move. He would buy enough HOA-owned land to gain voting control of the board. If he could control the board, he could dismantle their corrupt reign from within. It wasn't easy. The land was scattered, tangled in legal red tape, and fiercely guarded. But Mark's previous purchases gave him a foothold, and his team, including a trusted real estate broker, worked around the clock. Meanwhile, the intimidation intensified. Mark's mailbox was flooded with threatening notes. One night, his car was vandalized with the words, "Leave now." But Mark refused to be cowed. Then a strange ally emerged, Greg Dalton, the very man who had threatened him earlier. Greg reached out, requesting a secret meeting at a deserted diner. Mark was wary but curious. Sitting across from Greg, Mark asked, bluntly, "Why now? Why help me?" Greg sighed. "I'm done with the board's lies. They're dangerous, and they're going to drag this neighborhood down. I want out. But I want to see them fall as much as you do." Greg handed Mark a flash drive. Inside is proof of their worst schemes: money laundering, illegal evictions, forged documents. Mark stared, stunned. This was bigger than he imagined. But Greg warned, "This will make powerful enemies. You'll need to be ready." As Mark dug into the new evidence, Sarah filed motions to freeze HOA assets tied to suspicious accounts. Then came the ultimate test: a surprise HOA board election. Mark, with the backing of his growing coalition, launched a campaign to take over the board. The neighborhood was divided, some afraid to side with him, others emboldened by the chance for change. On election day, tension crackled in the air. Mark's heart pounded as votes were tallied. When the results were announced, a stunned silence fell. Mark had won the majority. Lisa Harlow's face twisted with rage and disbelief as Mark stepped up to assume control, but victory was bittersweet. The fight was far from over. The HOA's network of influence reached deep, and not everyone was willing to surrender their power quietly. That night, Mark's phone buzzed with a chilling message. "You think this is over? You're just beginning to pay the price." Knew the war was just starting, but now the board was his to command, and he intended to burn it down on his terms. Mark's victory in the HOA election was only the beginning. With the board's reins in his hands, he faced a war on two fronts, battling entrenched corruption while quelling the neighborhood's lingering fear and suspicion. His first order of business was transparency. Mark called an emergency board meeting and invited every homeowner. The room buzzed with anticipation and tension. For years, the HOA had operated in shadows, but tonight, Mark vowed to pull back the veil. Using the evidence Greg and Jenna had risked their lives to gather, Mark unveiled the web of lies, fraud, and intimidation. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as he named names, showed forged documents, and revealed hidden bank accounts. Lisa Harlow sat frozen, her usual, smug confidence shattered. She glared daggers at Mark, her silent fury palpable. But the battle was far from over. Lisa and her loyalists launched a counterattack, spreading rumors, threatening lawsuits, and trying to fracture the fragile unity Mark had built. One night, as Mark prepared to file new legal actions, his house was vandalized again. This time, a menacing symbol painted across his front door, accompanied by a chilling message. Stop or be stopped. Mark refused to be intimidated. In a bold move, he hired private security for his family and began documenting every threat, every irregularity. His allies grew bolder, inspired by his courage. But inside the boardroom, the pressure mounted. Some members, fearful of retribution, whispered about reversing the election results, calling into question Mark's legitimacy. Mark countered by rallying his supporters. Neighbors tired of living in fear. Together, they launched a campaign to rewrite the HOA's bylaws, stripping the board of unchecked power and ensuring homeowner rights. The tension reached a boiling point during a crucial vote on the new bylaws. Mark's opponents sabotaged the meeting, calling for adjournment and refusing to acknowledge the quorum. Tempers flared, voices raised. The confrontation teetered on chaos. Just as the meeting seemed doomed, a surprise ally stepped forward. Mrs. Carmichael, the elderly woman who had warned Mark weeks earlier. With quiet authority, she called for order, reminding everyone that the community's future was at stake. Her words struck a chord. In a narrow but decisive vote, the new bylaws passed, handing control back to the homeowners. Mark's heart swelled with cautious hope. But victory came with a price. Late that night, a fire broke out in the community center, the same center where the contentious board meetings were held. Flames engulfed the building, the smoke dark and suffocating. Firefighters arrived just in time to save nearby homes, but the message was clear. The fight was far from over. Mark stood outside, watching the fire consume the heart of the neighborhood. He clenched his fists, eyes burning with determination. They had tried to burn him once. Now they were burning his entire community, and he would stop them, no matter what. The flames from the community center's fire cast a hellish glow against the night sky, illuminating the faces of neighbors gathered in shocked silence. The place where Mark had fought so hard for justice, for transparency, was now a smoldering ruin. The fire was no accident. Mark knew it deep in his bones. As the embers cooled, Sarah and Mark began piecing together evidence. Surveillance footage from nearby homes revealed shadowy figures moving quickly just before the fire erupted. The same faces that had sent threats, vandalized his property, and tried to silence dissent. But then came the twist no one expected. Among the suspects was one of Mark's closest neighbors, someone he had trusted implicitly. Jenna, who had vanished weeks ago, was alive, hiding in fear. Her reappearance was a shock, but what she revealed next stunned everyone. The corruption goes deeper, Jenna confessed, voice trembling. There's a secret faction within the HOA, a small group that profits from these fires, these intimidations. They're tied to developers who want to buy out the neighborhood and turn it into commercial property. Lisa was just a pawn. The revelation sent ripples through the community. The war wasn't just about control, it was about greed on a massive scale. With Jenna's testimony and Greg's evidence, Mark moved swiftly. He coordinated with local authorities and the state attorney's office to launch a full investigation into the HOA's illicit activities. In a dramatic courtroom showdown, the corrupt board members were exposed, arrested, and charged with fraud, arson, and intimidation. The developers behind the scheme faced public backlash and legal action. Mark watched as his neighborhood slowly began to heal. The burned garage was rebuilt, the community center reconstructed, but this time with an open-door policy and homeowner oversight. At the final board meeting, Mark addressed the residents. This fight wasn't just mine. It was ours. We stood up to fear, to corruption and greed. We took back our community. Applause filled the room. But Mark knew the scars would remain, a reminder of the dark battle beneath the neighborhood's peaceful surface. Then came the last twist. Just as Mark was about to leave the meeting, his phone buzzed. A text message. No sender, no reply. You've won this battle, Mark, but the war for our homes never truly ends. Mark smiled wryly, pocketing the phone. He had burned the HOA's hold on the neighborhood, but the fight for justice and peace was ongoing, and Mark Jensen was ready for whatever came next.